Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. One of the resident, I guess, well-known authorities in Central Texas for fantasy football. It's Steve May. How you doing, Steve?
Hey, Brian, doing well.
Okay, explain to me how you become an authority in fantasy football to the point that you actually were teaching classes on fantasy football for rookies at McLennan Community College.
Well, gosh, probably about 7 years ago, we started a league through the local sports radio show here in town, and it just kind of grew into a thing much bigger than I ever imagined. Last year, we had 12 leagues of 10 people, so we had 120 people playing. So it's really turned into a thing that people look forward to, and it's a lot of fun. And so through that, I guess I've built up a reputation as kind of knowing what I'm talking about, fantasy sports. And a couple of months ago, the community college here reached out to me, and they have a continuing education series that they offer to residents in the area that can cover cooking, computer skills, golf, whatever. And they decided to offer a class for fantasy football for rookies. And we started that a couple weeks ago, and it's going great.
How many people have you got in the class?
We currently have 8.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. For the first time, we wanted to get up to 10, so maybe we could put all 10 into one league, and they could battle it out head to head. But we ended up with 8, and it's going good. And hopefully next year we'll have more. Okay.
And what do you do for a living?
I work for a technology company. We do mobile applications for Apple and Android. I'm the director of business development for them.
Okay, great. So how many hours a week do you spend on fantasy football?
Never at work. Never.
Ever. No, certainly not.
Right. No one does that. I'm into the point now where I've already had a couple of drafts for some of the leagues I play in, and so.
How many different leagues do you play in?
I'll play in 5. That's a reduction for me.
A reduction. That's good to know.
Yeah, I think I got to the point where my wife and kids were about to do a intervention program, so I backed off, and I do 5, and a lot of those are with friends. We've had the leagues going for several years, so it's fun. Some of those guys, we only get together now because we're so busy. We only get together for the draft, so it's a way to kind of reunite at least once a year. But once the season gets going, I'll probably spend 2 to 3 hours a week looking at rosters and getting my roster ready each week.
All right, and then maybe next year you can have a fantasy football for addicts class. All right, so people are going to be doing a lot of drafting. I guess this weekend is the big weekend for football drafts, and so give me some tips, for how I should approach the draft. What are some strategies that you offer to people?
Well, this year has really turned into the year of the quarterback. The last 5 to 6 years, everybody has gone along the lines of you got to get a stud running back early. And to be honest with you, very few teams, NFL teams, have a one-guy running back. It's all running back by committee. So, once you get past Arian Foster, Ray Rice, and LaShawn McCoy, really getting into teams that have the running back by committee. So quarterbacks are huge. If you got a pick in the first 5 or 6 of the first round, I would get Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, Tom Brady, because consistently over the last 5 to 6 years, quarterbacks are the top scorers because the rules in the NFL now favor offense, and the quarterback touches the ball every play. So quarterbacks are huge. And then depending on your league scoring, you really want to look at a stud running back, a stud receiver.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't get one of those top quarterbacks, let's say you're picking maybe 8th, 9th, or 10th in that first round, I would look for a receiver before a running back. There's lots of good running backs that are going to be getting touchdowns, catching a lot of balls that you can get in the 2nd and 3rd round.
All right. Now, I heard something. I was listening to a podcast. It was the Bill Simmons podcast a couple of days ago, actually, and he had a fantasy football guru on who was suggesting that in this particular draft, if you had a chance to get Rob Gronkowski or Jimmy Graham, to take him in the second round. What's your opinion about taking a tight end in the second round, or in particular taking one of those two guys?
Well, those two guys last year really changed that tight end position, for at least in a fantasy perspective. And Jimmy Graham, if he wasn't a tight end and was just a receiver, he would be a top receiver that you would want to get. So Jimmy Graham is high on my list. I still have a problem drafting a tight end that early. There's lots of good tight ends that you can get in the 4th or 5th round, like Vernon Davis, Jermichael Finley, Jason Witten, depending on his health. But Jimmy Graham and Gronkowski are going early. Gronkowski, I'm not sold on him because he shares time out there on the field with Aaron Hernandez.
Mm-hmm.
So, this season I could see Hernandez having just as good a season as Gronkowski did last year. It just depends on, what kind of mood Brady's in and who he feels comfortable with. And I think Gronkowski's kind of a meathead anyway, so I'm not sure if, he's going to stay on the field for all 16 games this year. So.
Okay. And another theory that they had was in taking a guy like Arian Foster, who is a vegan now. That worries some people.
Yeah, but who was it? Was it Hakeem Olajuwon?
Yeah.
And the NBA would always take that period of time off for Ramadan where he wouldn't eat, much, and he always seemed to perform well. So I'm not letting a player's diet habits get in the way of me drafting them.
There was also some concern about the New Orleans Saints in general, just because the karma against this team right now. Anything that can go wrong this past year has gone wrong. So it's almost like stay away from New Orleans Saints players in general, just because it seems like they're cursed this year. You have any thoughts on that?
If I'm in a league with you and you pass on Drew Brees, I will gladly take him. No, I'm not shying away from them at all. Drew Brees is going to be huge. We just mentioned Jimmy Graham. All three, here's a great example of a running back by committee. They got Pierre Thomas, Mark Ingram, and Darren Sproles. And on both drafts I've had already, I've got Sproles and Pierre Thomas on my roster. And there'll probably be games where I'm actually playing them both in my running back positions, just because they're going to get equal touches. Sproles is going to catch a lot of balls. Ingram's the touchdown guy. Pierre Thomas is going to be one of the yardage guys. So, no, you shouldn't hesitate at all to get Saints on your roster.
Okay, there is the tip that you're not supposed to let your emotions control your draft.
That's true. I tell people, the first time they play, that fantasy football will change the way you watch NFL games. Because on Sundays or whenever the game is, you're rooting for your favorite team to win. I'm a Dallas Cowboy fan, through and through. But there's going to be those times where I may have a Redskin on my roster, or an Eagle, or heaven forbid a Steeler, and so, I'm wanting the Cowboys to do well, but then you're looking at your individual players to do well. So, being here in Waco, being a Baylor grad, I'm a huge RG3 fan.
Sure.
And it just broke my heart that he went to the stinking Redskins. But so I've drafted RG3 on one of my teams. So, when the Cowboys play the Redskins, I want it to be a 42-40 game where the Cowboys win, but RG3 throws for 5 touchdowns,
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. So, and then speaking of the Cowboys, I know a lot of people, because they are huge Cowboy fans, they want to jump all over guys like Des Bryant and DeMarco Murray and even Witten. And I'm a big Cowboy fan, but I'm also a sportscaster, and their offensive line is horrendous, and I'm not counting on anybody on that offense doing very well this year. So you tell me what direction I need to go with these guys.
Well, there shouldn't be any Cowboys drafted in a fantasy draft in the first probably 3 to 4 rounds. DeMarco Murray's going probably first, but he's being drafted, in at least the 2 I've done already, he's being drafted as the second running back on a roster, not the first running back. And then Witten, and then, man, you get in those receivers, Miles Austin and Des Bryant. Miles Austin, since that 2009 season, has yet to stay on the field for a full season. So I wouldn't draft either of those guys as my number 1 receiver on a fantasy team, but as a 2 or a 3, I think that's fine. And Romo is in that second tier of fantasy quarterbacks once you get past, Rodgers, Breeze, Brady, and a lot of people are putting Matthew Stafford in that top niche this year. Then you get into, Romo and Ryan and Roethlisberger. So it just depends on where your draft falls and how late you want to wait for a quarterback on getting Romo. But I'm with you. That offensive line scares me to death.
Who are some sleepers that you might recommend?
My number one sleeper, and it's go back to the tight end position. I usually don't get two tight ends on a roster. I'll draft one, and then I'll just have one for the season and switch it out when I have a bye week. But this year, I'm getting two. And that second one I'm drafting, I'm getting him late in the 13th, 14th round, is Coby Fleener of the Colts. They got rid of Dallas Clark. He's now with Tampa. And most people should know the connection between Andrew Luck and Fleener. They were teammates at Stanford. So I think Fleener is going to have a huge year. And a lot of people are forgetting about him. He's just slipping down a little bit on the draft. And then another one, kind of a dark horse, is Rashard Jennings in Jacksonville. He's a good running back. Maurice Jones-Drew is holding out. Now he wants a trade. So I've been getting Jennings again late. And if that pans out where they get rid of MJD, I've got me a top-tier running back in the 13th and 14th round of the draft. So those are two guys I would just kind of, when you're doing your draft, see where they're at. You're getting towards the end. Really, at the end, you're just drafting for depth on your roster. So Jennings and Fleener, I would keep an eye out for.
What about Adrian Peterson?
He's being drafted, and he's being drafted early. I think people now are starting to feel a little bit more comfortable getting him on their roster. I don't know if he's going to start week one. I think week two will be more of a given. So if you get Peterson, I would highly recommend getting Bobby Gerhart later. That's called handcuffing your run back. That's when you get the starting running back, and then you get his backup just in case. So that's a situation where I really think you need to do that. If you get Peterson, get Gerhart probably in the 8th, 9th, or 10th round of your draft.
And who's a player that you need to avoid at all costs that seems to go really high and always just rips your heart out?
Andre Johnson is very frustrating. He gets drafted as a top receiver. He'll go in the first round in almost every draft. But, man, I don't know what's wrong with his hamstrings, but he manages to pull one every year, and then he's out for 4 or 5 games. So he's extremely frustrating. And then we mentioned the Cowboys earlier. Felix Jones has been drafted the last 3 or 4 years.
I don't want any part of Felix Jones in real life or fantasy.
He's up until this year, he's been drafted in 2nd, 3rd, 4th round, just because that everybody thinks he's got it. The light's going to turn on at some point. But this year, the 2 drafts I've done already, he has not been drafted at all. And that's the first time that's happened. Yep.
Interesting. Well, Steve, we do appreciate you coming on with us. We would love to talk to you again down the line as we go through the season to see how things are going. And it's fascinating stuff always, and we really did appreciate talking to you today.
Sure, anytime.
All right, good deal. And is there some kind of a website or anything where people can find more information from you? Are you doing anything like that, or?
The easiest way that they can reach me is through the email address that I use I get fantasy advice weekly. People email me, and that email address is commish1660@yahoo.com. So just commish, like the TV show, commish1660@yahoo.com. Shoot me an email, and if you got some questions, I'll answer them.
Outstanding. Hey, Steve, thanks very much for coming on with us today. We really appreciate it.
Okay, take care.
Good talking to you. Steve May, a fantasy football guru out of Waco, Texas. This is Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.